Good. Well, welcome, everyone. My name is Guillaume Wiatr. I'm the principal and founder of MetaHelm. MetaHelm specializes in creating a strategic narrative for companies, big and small. And today, I welcome you to this strategic narrative underground session. We're going to do a part 2 of what we already started discussing yesterday. I got some really incredible feedback from you guys. And quite frankly, I kind of ran out of time last Thursday. So I'd like a second chance to go over the difference between story and narrative. I think it's an important concept. It's the cornerstone of my perspective on strategic narrative. I'd like a chance to explore it more with you. I will maybe repeat a little bit of what we discussed, what I presented last week, and add more to it. Hopefully a lot more, and I will hopefully shed some light. So last week I went over a couple of examples, and I focused on this idea that stories and narrative are different in the sense that stories are typically from the past, and they are this closed-ended recount of events that have occurred before. And I see narrative as a concept that is a lot more open-ended. And the opportunity there is that when you lead with something that is unfinished, it creates an open door and open invitation for people to join you on an adventure, on a project, on a mission. Maybe you're launching a company, maybe you're starting a new project, you're launching a new product, you have an invention that you want to take to market. So the situations could be that broad, and that's what a narrative will do for you. But that's only one of the factors. So I'd like to expand a little more here. And someone here in the group reminded me, rightfully so, that I came up with an important distinction that he found powerful. I think it was Bob. And I said in one of my articles, I publish 7 days a week. And in September, I had this breakthrough moment where I found myself using story and narrative quite interchangeably. And I thought, okay, everybody does this, but there must be a difference. And in thinking about this, I came up with this quote that people will probably pay for a story, but they will almost die for a narrative. And that's a significant distinction here, if you think about it. What I mean by pay for a story is, of course, I refer to books, movies. We'll be glad to hear what the hero had to go through. And once we're done, we enjoy the story. But the hero wasn't us. The hero was maybe the storyteller or the protagonist in the story. And that's all great. It may motivate us, it may appeal us it may be compelling to catch our attention for a certain topic. So in business, when there is this big buzz about storytelling, and it's been going on now for maybe 1 or 2 decades, and it's really at its peak right now, where there's not a single day where you can't find an article on LinkedIn or Facebook about the importance of storytelling. I find it quite limiting to just keep storytelling at this definition of, hey, it's very simple. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think there is much more to this. Narratives, on the other hand, are systems of stories. They also connect to stories, right? But they are systems of stories. They are open-ended possibilities, because people will take extraordinary measures based on a narrative, based on a system of beliefs and values that hopefully will lead them to something better, maybe a promised land or something of that nature. I want to share a few examples here. One very recent, in January 6th, we saw a group of people attack the Capitol. And I would argue that this movement was based on a narrative, maybe a positive, maybe a negative one, depending on which side you stand. And probably based on, in my opinion, very debatable facts. So that's what a narrative can do. And if you pay attention to, and if you expand, on that notion, narratives are really at the core of every political, business, religious movement. There is always a belief there. I want to share another example, which is my own example. I'm originally from France. I immigrated here in 2008, and I did so because of a narrative, the American dream. Come to the United States, and you will be able to become a different person, realize incredible things. But this will require you to come here. Will you dare come here? That's where the narrative ends, the question mark here. So when you think about a narrative, you now think about something that shifts in the mind of people, and actually in the hearts and minds of people. And there are really three things that occur there. A narrative will change emotions. It's either based on a like or a dislike. It will change your action. Your behavior may be different. You may do certain things that you didn't do before. And that is critical when you're in business and you are introducing new ideas and new products to the market, because you will ask that your consumers, your customers change their behavior, right? If I am Netflix, maybe 20 years ago, and I tell the population, I tell everyone, hey guys, no need to go to the video store and show a plate and pay the fees. We'll just send you DVDs, as many as you want, and as you can keep them as long as you want. That's a radical change in behavior, right? All of a sudden, I don't have to go somewhere, but at the same time, I don't meet friends anymore. So there are pros and cons here. And the third thing is a change in what you believe in the cognitive side of a narrative, right? A narrative is here to change with three things. Maybe a story starts showing evidence and proving that this new framework works, but it's just a subset of what a narrative really is. A narrative is much bigger. So as you can hear here, the difference between story and narrative is that, to me, a narrative is really the system of stories that promotes a specific point of view, viewpoint, or set of values. And I just wrote this article a couple of days ago where I was actually making the argument that this set of values and this point of view could also be called an attitude. And that's quite important here, because attitude is what makes you stand out. A company, a group, a person can have an attitude. And if you pause here and think for just a second about someone who knows has an attitude as a person, so somebody you run into, and after meeting them, you thought, okay, this person has an attitude, right? Think about someone right now, just for a second. Was it a positive attitude? Was it a negative attitude? It doesn't matter. The fact is that this person probably stood out to you. And in a crowded market, if you launch a new company, if you launch a new startup, having an attitude is almost a question of death or life. Having a narrative is really critical for that in that regard. So with the narrative, you really make people do impossible things to get your product. That's what Apple does really, really well. Every time they launched a new iPhone in the last decade and a half, what did we see? People camping in front of their stores. That's a crazy idea, right? Maybe one of you did it here in this group. I did not, but I always found this fascinating, that your brand is so magnetic, defends such a strong set of values, that you have people camping in front of your store to get to be first in line to get the product. Everyone will have the product, but still people show up early and take the risk to be in line. A narrative also is kind of polarizing, whereas a story, maybe takes a stand, but a narrative really had this in the moment kind of emotional aspect to it. And you will, if you have a good narrative for your business, you will run into advocates, and maybe at the beginning they are early adopters, and quickly you will have people telling you that what you stand for is nuts, that it will not work, or it's harmful, or it's just unfair. Recently, I read the story of how Volvo invented the 3-point safety belt. It was 1959, and the engineer that created that system knew what he was doing. He was a veteran from inventing other safety system for aircraft. He had done a lot of research. In 1959, Volvo decided to introduce the seatbelt, the 3-point seatbelt, in standard to all their vehicles. And they knew that you could be in any car accident if you had an under 60 miles per hour. If you had a 3-point seatbelt, you'd be very likely still alive. And so they knew that so it was a very efficient system. And still, it took them 6 years to convince other manufacturers and countries to come up with policies to make the system mandatory. And this is what they heard. And you can find it in the video that Volvo actually released not very long ago. The media went nuts against that system. The media said, this is a limitation of freedom. This is actually a very dangerous system, because if you get in a crash and you can't get out of the car because of that belt, you're going to die. And we don't think about this. The first thing you do when you take your car, right? I look at you all here. What do you do when you get in your car and drive? You fasten your seatbelt, most likely, right? And still some people resist that today. So this is an example of what a narrative will do. And a narrative will polarize very strongly depending on whether you're trying to just keep things, with the status quo, which I call the optimization side of your narrative. And last week I drew this axis, this concept of optimization versus transformation. So if you're just about optimizing something that already works, you may not, face a lot of status quo. But if you are really about transforming something that you very deeply believe that needs to change, something maybe related to justice, something related to health, something related to the way we do business, whatever that means, you're going to be transformational, and you're going to meet those people who are skeptical about your idea. So a strategic narrative is not a given. It takes time, takes effort. But the opportunities that it brings could be massive. In fact, there are 7 of them. And I will probably leave you with that, and then we can engage in a conversation here. But I really see 7 virtues of thinking in terms of narrative versus stories. The first one, and I touched on them a little bit here in the presentation I just did, but I just want to recap them and really pinpoint them. The first one is the possibility. So again, I'm gonna assume that we're in the context of business. I'm running a business. I'm a CEO of an established company, or maybe a founder of a new startup. It doesn't matter where you are on the journey, but you're a business person. The first value of a strategic narrative is this idea of brand magnetism. I make a difference between strategic narrative and brand narrative. I think they're 2 different things, and I think one depends on the other. But really, brand magnetism comes from the stand that you take. It's one of the things that help your brand, become magnetic. But that's one of the first virtue here. The second one is about alignment and engagement. If you have a clear and different narrative, it's easier to know who to recruit. It's easier for your team to know what to do in terms of in times of crisis, or when they have important meetings and they need to align about a project. The third one is about collaboration. And there is a a lot of research about how from the dawn of time, human beings have been, as Homo sapiens, in fact, we've been able to survive because of our ability to imagine new things through stories and narratives. That's how we live. We survive thanks to that. So if you transpose this to your business environment, a good strategic narrative should really help collaboration, should really help you bond your team and make people work together more collaboratively. Help me out. Fourth is about trust in people who want to support your venture, investors. They see that there is leg here. And we've heard a lot about activism, around in the relationship between investors and CEOs. And that's what it's about. It's about believing in the cause that your company will support. And so you'll have something much more powerful to attract the investors that really believe in your business. Fifth one is differentiation. How many companies today, how many software, how many applications are in a given market? Dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands. I looked the other day at a diagram of the, I think it's something about marketing applications, things like HubSpot. There's literally hundreds of them. I had no idea. How do you stand out? How do you differentiate in this crowd? If you have a narrative that is just, you're telling the same stories as everyone, and your narrative is not really about transforming anything, you don't stand a chance. You're just going to optimize little things and hope for the best. Next is really about driving what I call adoption urgency. I want to go back to the Volvo example. The engineers in Volvo are still fanatic about safety. And for them in 1959, it was so obvious and so urgent to adopt this invention and turning into an outstanding innovation. And so if you have a good compelling narrative, that's what it will do. People will immediately click and understand that now is the time to do something. And finally, I believe that a strategic narrative helps decision making, because if you know what you stand for, if you know what the story is in people's mind, decisions are just so much easier. There is no hesitancy. It's just a lot clearer. It will help you just take the strategic, decisions that you need to a lot more easily. And that's why I call it a strategic narrative, not just in the sense of, hey, it's strategic because it's important, right? But also, and most importantly, because I feel and I believe that that narrative is actually the strategy. So what about stories then? Well, stories are, like I say, really important. They're the system that creates the narrative. You should pay attention to how you tell them, but you should be really, really careful about which one you tell, and make sure that you do that carefully, that you plan it carefully, so that consciously you decide to have a strategic narrative or not. That's your choice. But I'll leave you with that. I hope that clarified the difference between story and narrative. Okay, so when I say people will pay for a story, but people will die for a narrative, what situation does this make you think of? Can you think of an example?
War.
What is it?
Going to war.
Going to war, yeah.
Sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Engaging in a big cause.
Mm-hmm. Because, yeah.
It actually makes me think of Facebook. It makes me think about the way that people engage with individual stories. They will exchange things for individual stories. They will click, and they will share. But the stories are building into a narrative that will motivate action, that often motivates action, or certainly a mindset. And we've seen that with politics. We've seen that with attitudes towards vaccines. We've seen it with a lot of things. So stories, when I loved that line so much when I first read it from you. I still do, and it felt to me like stories are the little tokens of exchange that we're almost depositing them as capital, and eventually
Interesting.
They build narrative. But I take your larger point from today that one should be, if one is building a strategic narrative, intentional about the narrative and intentional about the stories you select to support that narrative.
Yeah, that's correct, Bob. That's my point. I think there is an opportunity there, and I think it's something that we should all learn to do, at least be aware and conscious of it. I think a lot of leaders do it consciously or unconsciously, and some of them doing better, some of them do it better than others, and for causes to me that are better than others too. One thing I never thought about, and thank you for sharing this, is thinking of stories as those coins. You say coins that you add to create a capital. That's really interesting because it make me so there is value there. Not it means that there is value, that the narrative can be valued too.
Yeah, but it emphasizes the difference of scale, right? There's only so much you can do with. We don't even think about what we're doing, what we're amassing when we click on these stories, when we engage with them, when we share them. But we are amassing something. We are building our own narratives and participating in the building of those narratives socially.
Yes.
There is, and it is a kind of currency.
It is a currency. There is this comments here makes me think of another relationship in connection. There is another actually one of the basic way to understand a narrative in psychology almost is a narrative is a heuristic. It's the story that we've told ourselves or we've been exposed to before many times, so that when we are faced to a decision, we don't even think about it anymore. It becomes a habit. So I'll borrow this example from somebody who's written a book about this. And he says, when we go to a Mexican restaurant here in the United States, what's the first thing? You sit down at the table. What's the first thing that you expect to happen?
Chips and salsa. Chips
and salsa. That's exactly the example in the book. And that's the proof right there, that this is the narrative, that this is one of the facets of the narrative around Mexican restaurant. And if somebody doesn't bring you chips and salsa, you're going to be like, it's going to be surprising. Maybe you'll be offended. Maybe you don't care. But chances are that you will notice it, because that story has been told and repeated so many times over and over and over that you don't even think about it. It's completely unconscious. It's a very small example, very kind of.
Do you mean that to some extent narratives are giving birth to some of the stereotypes we all have?
Yeah, absolutely.
In cultures.
Absolutely. And I think that in business we do that consciously or unconsciously. We work with these. here's another example I wrote about a few days ago, and it's about recycling. When I'm done with something, I want to, at least here in the United States, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, because I know, people come from around the world here, but here, at least in Seattle, I want to do something with my my jar, my box, and I'm wondering, should I recycle it? And so the narrative is that you should recycle, whatever you throw away. That's how we've been educated. We don't even think about it. But the truth is that only 8% of the waste that we throw in the recycle gets actually recycled. And the other truth is that the production of waste is skyrocketing at the moment, if you look at the numbers. So that's a narrative. We go on autopilot almost. That's the way we do things around here. That's the way that's what we go by. Is this still a good narrative? That's debatable. That's another story. But I think it's a great illustration of how it just puts us on autopilot. And when you have a business, you have a chance to either go with that flow, or we say disrupt what the old narrative may be. And that has value to Bob's point. So, all right. It's 9:30.
Another point.
I don't want to keep you here, but I just want to call it out. I promise 30 minutes. But if you have more questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes. Thank you so much.